Good Thursday to you, everybody. Income 851. Welcome to week kaboom 5. How's everybody doing? Did I say 851? I'm sorry, 831. No, the course hasn't been switched on you. I simply am not sufficiently caffeinated, obviously. Little teeny cup. Who do we have here? What do we have here today? What's this? Bucky from, I'm not quite sure how to say this town. Severalville from Tennessee. And in case you're wondering, if you've ever driven past or even been in a Bucky's and you see the little espresso cups for Bucky's, and you go, yeah, that's weird. Who does that? Here he is. Much better. Okay, now I am sufficiently caffeinated. 831 comms. All right, welcome. We're posting this just a smidgy bit late because the module last week went out a little bit late. And so, like last week, I'm going to have the discussion questions for this coming week due on Tuesday night at 11:59, and that will be Tuesday the 17th instead of the normal Monday, which would be Monday the 16th. And don't forget Valentine's Day this weekend, this Saturday. Okay, and that's just because we kind of got out of sync last week, but this week, since really the big focus, this week moving into next week, is part one of your papers, which are due on the 16th. You will have till Tuesday night to finish those discussion questions. So if you need a little extra time over the weekend to focus on the paper and get that done before you drill down into the discussion questions, that's perfectly okay. I think what I'm going to do is I'll keep this schedule in which things are due Tuesday night and not Monday night until maybe we get on the other side of spring break, modular week or something like that. Okay. All right. This week we're going to continue our readings in macroeconomics. I have a an optional discussion for you here from the author. It's dated, I think it's like 12, 13, 14 years ago, but it gives you an insight into the whys and wheres that they created this book. So I think it should interest you. Okay. So take a look at that. And of course, make sure that you finish your paper. Now, remember, this is not draft work. Okay. Because I can't analyze something that is draft. So this needs to be finished work. That is a finished. Now, when I say finished, you're going to adjust it when you finish with the second half, but finish now. So finished introduction, finished annotated bibliography, and please understand the difference between an annotated bibliography and a literature review, right? If you confuse the two when you do this, I'm going to ding you. Okay. And then methodology. And those of you who've been, talking with me about methodology, if you're going to do human subject research, you need to get IRB approval. Now, I would recommend for all of you that you take the CITI City ethics course, and it's more of a time thing than it is a brain buster. I mean, they're gonna, except for various government regulations and what's in, Rule 30, Section 6, and it's like yawn. Most of it's fairly common sense. Okay. But once you get that certificate, the door opens up for you to be able to do primary source research, which makes you much more valuable by way of a demonstrable skill to would-be employers. I mean, you can pay anybody's nephew to look stuff up. What we need is someone that can do original research to start thinking about doing that. I'm not saying you need to do it right now for this class, that equip yourself, arm yourself with that skill set. Okay, so this week, that's the schedule for readings and what you're going to be doing. Focus, get those papers in. Okay, let's take a look at last week at the questions, see what you wrote and what we can add to it. Question number 1, Topscott and Williams asked the question, why should the technology data risk assessment models that are used to value products be kept hidden from the public? And, and there might actually be good rhyme and reason for this. And in, some reasons, no. But Charlene, you went last. Let's take you first. Topscott and Williams' question is aimed at the perennial finance dysfunction, opacity. How opaque something is. And I mean, I'll relate to sort of a personal anecdote, and you're absolutely right, Charlene. We're looking at changing who handles some of our money and retirement and things. And geez, man, you sit down for the initial talk. It's like, okay, is this organization going to work? And then you get this flood of disclosure documents. And the very, very last one was this admission of wrongdoing for some FCC, Federal Communication Commission and Federal Trade Commission, FTC, violation, and that they paid some penalty. And I'm going, wait, what? Shouldn't you have told me this on the upfront? Alas, no. Let's go back to you, Charlene. When banks treat their models, be they risk models, pricing models, loan models, as intellectual property, markets cannot officially price risk. And external parties, investors, regulators, even just us as the public, can't fully audit the assumptions baked into risky investments. There are assumptions baked into all investments, by the way. The problem was on display in 2008 when trust evaporated, in part because counterparties could not independently verify exposure after years of model certainty. Okay. Charlene, make sure you can turn this into plain English and be specific about what it is you're referencing, because if this comes up on the test, you want to be direct. But that is, in fact, the correct answer. Kai, let's see what you have to say. Authors of Macroeconomics argue in 2008 global financial crisis exposed deep structural weaknesses within global institutions and showed an urgent need for new approach built on transparency, integrity, collaboration, openness, and sharing. Okay, so a similar reference. I think one of the most interesting explorations of this in popular culture was the movie The Big Short. SHORT, The Big Short. And it does a pretty good job of explaining what happened in 2008. Trinity. They raise a question that feels like they are inviting you to rethink how trust works in modern systems. If technology data risk models are shaping how products are valued and how the markets behave, it's fair to ask why those tools are kept out of public view. As the review points out, the lack of transparency around these models played a role in the 2008 financial crisis, where secrecy made it hard for both regulators and public to see the problem forming. And now remember, if you're going to reference this in an answer on a test, a wink, make sure to say what the problem in 2008 was. Okay, the author suggests that collaboration could have helped catch flaws earlier and make understanding more widely rather than concentrating it among small groups of experts. Look at where we are today. There have been improvements in oversight and discussion around transparency, but many of the core systems are still difficult to access and fully understand outside specialized circles. True, true, and true. And all of this is true. Should we have transparency? Yeah, we're gonna get to the effects of that when we get to questions about healthcare, as you will see here shortly. And but the question becomes, let's say you have full transparency. Okay, you say, this is how this is invested, or this is how this is what this costs. Okay, The question becomes, one, will the public utilize it? That is, do they actually take the time to read it? And two, what's the balance? And this is a key concern to us as communicators. What is the balance between volume of information? Okay, because you can overwhelm someone that you're trying to inform by just, I mean, like it's like take a look at the explanatory documents that come with, say, a credit card application, and just like, okay, one, the volume of information, but then two, weighed against the necessity to explain specific expertise in specific fields to non-experts in those fields. Because every field, be that in finance or medicine or engineering or in trades, I don't mean like stocks, I mean like, say, plumbing, has its own specifics by way of technology, detail, application process. Every trade develops a vocabulary, a shorthand to describe those things. So then if you're trying to break it down to a non-expert, how much, and there are prohibitions against excessive verbiage that can be used to make something complicated and make somebody simply give up, like, it's like, how many of us have actually read through the cell phone contract before you got the phone? Okay. And so you don't want, that's not going to inform an individual. Now you're just overwhelming them. But then can you explain the peculiarities of a business in shorthand form and still have full disclosure? Yes. Are some organizations motivated to keep things hidden because they don't want people to know how things work? Yeah, of course. That's human nature. But the larger problem, and I'm faulting your authors in a way for this, the larger problem comes, we're trying to strike the balance between how much information is needed to explain what can be a complicated process, say, even in money, and too much information, which just overwhelms the user. And they just go, I can't understand this. Okay. Not so cut and dry. Question 2. What is the difference between the old crisis paradigm and the new crisis paradigm, given the capabilities of new digital media? Okay. Let's see. Who are we looking at? Looking at for this? All right, Carolyn, because you had a gratuitous photo on the SS Carl Vinson in Hawaii, 2011. Okay. Difference between old crisis paradigm, and since it was mentioned on page 5, talking about relief in Haiti. Okay, that's why the photos are. Okay, Carolyn, what you have to say? Difference between the old paradigm, crisis paradigm, and the new one are many. One is that the old crisis paradigm, wherein big institutions aid workers parachute into crisis, assess the situation, and then dispense aid with limited information they have, is vulnerable to fragmentation, resulting in poor decision-making, redundancy, and confusion, and often to waste money and wasted opportunity. While the new paradigm relies on self-organized work of volunteers based on data victims on the ground supply them using cell phones, whatever communication channels are available to them. The new model is more coherent. Tapscott and Williams say ordinary people can create effective new information services that are speedier and more resilient than traditional ones. Okay, yes, that is the ideal. And if you were asked about it on a test, you'd have to say, well, this is the ideal. Now, as someone who's done a lot of international humanitarian work, again, and this isn't rip the author apart hour, okay? I can tell you that this ideal is not always ideal. Why? Because it is true that sort of top-down crisis response can miss things sometimes, okay? But it is also true that bottom-up response, that is simply allowing users, that is those who are, well, users, victims in the case of the crisis, to supply information, and then make an assessment from there. There's an assumption baked into that approach. And the assumption is that all victims, individuals, participants in a crisis are reporting the nature of the episode, say no food over here, or lots of, in the case of a flood, lots of water over there, using the same scale of evaluation, which is not true. What do I mean by that? Same scale of evaluation. Because how dire the situation really is, that drives the necessity of the allocation of resources, triage, can be subjective. And I have been in many crisis situations in various parts in the world, from natural disasters, caused by natural disasters, caused by war, caused by organized famine. There's famine that was caused by political clashes and withholding of food. And in every single instance, I've been in, I don't know, a dozen refugee camps. I've worked with thousands, tens of thousands of refugees. And in every one of those instances, I have found instances in which an individual or small group of individuals, and I got to be very careful about how I say this, because I'm not it sounds arrogant and judgy, but it's evaluatory. I found, there's some individuals who are absolutely certain they're dying, that this is needed right now, and what they really needed was just a bottle of water, and they're not dying. They're admittedly terribly uncomfortable and very distressed. Okay. And then over here, where there are individuals actually dying, those individuals, or the ones suffering, or the ones taking care of them, were not aware of the signs of imminent death. Because how many, for ordinary people, how many people, you get set down and say, okay, these are the signs that you're looking for when someone is near death. The breathing sounds like this. The pulse goes like that. I go, well, just look at him. He's sleeping. No, that guy's almost dead. It was over here that the resources needed to be applied, not here. So it is not as ideal in its function as the ideal suggests. It's a different way to go about it. That's true. Okay. So again, I'm not telling you this to take your authors apart. I'm giving you an evaluation of old and new paradigm, which I don't like that word because it's so often misused, as it actually functions. Okay, question number 3. What is one of the most effective means to create long-term value in an organization? Okay, so now we're throwing back, okay, to other stuff that you read. Let's see. Who have we not taken by way of giving us a response? Alicia, one of the most effective ways to create long-term value in an organization is understanding and appreciating, excuse me. You do not know what you do not know, which I say all the time to my stagnant teams. And I'm assuming, present company excluded. I read that cracks me up. Striving to keep learning and doing well are what will set you apart from the competition. I love that our highlight in this chapter 9 quoted Yammer CTO Adam Pisoni, who told them, "We can safely assume that everything we think right today is wrong tomorrow." When organizations operate with this mindset, value creation can be applied to organizational growth as well as relationship with members of the ecosystem, that is, of the organization. And this is from Hoke and Bear. Okay, Hoke and Bear resonates with the reciprocity across company footprints, internally, externally. Yeah, you need to give employees spaces to think. Okay, Maya, you point this out. Organizations where employees and clients' nationwide communication tools are essential to day operations, whether it's communication teams sharing updates. Our intranet is the primary tool for communication. Okay, you need to keep pushing people to keep learning. Okay. Um, I mean, and pay attention to what you learn. There are a couple of outstanding examples in business history, organizational history, that demonstrates the importance of this. I mean, did you know that the now bankrupt Sears Corporation, it was Amazon before Amazon was Amazon? That is, Sears got its start, and I'm talking about like towards the back of the 20th, the beginning of the 20th century. Sears got its start as a mail order catalog. I remember the catalog as a kid, and you know, you could look in there and find, I mean, just about anything that you could order, and you sent in your order. You know, you there was a form in the back, and you clipped it out and mailed it in, and then it wasn't, you know, wasn't like first next day delivery or something like Amazon in that way. And then it arrived. And this started, I mean, this actually got underway in the 1890s. And then they expanded, that is the company, to brick and mortar stores. And they resisted the transition to use the growing, okay, delivery networks that were competing with a US mail system that was being overwhelmed. I mean, it used to be, before the US mail system went, you know, maybe there's a lot of money to be made here. If you mailed a large package, the arrival time was so much longer than just a letter, because it was priority. It's like, look, we got all of this, you know, we got all this stuff to handle. The biggie box stuff is going to take longer. There were companies that popped up alongside of that that realized that people were sending things boxed, and they wanted, you know, there was a necessity of getting those things there as quick or quicker than you got a letter, a paper document. This was FedEx. All right. And say, hey, you know, there's a parallel market here. Okay. Sears could have taken advantage of that growing market to say, you know what, I bet we could deliver our stuff a lot faster and continue to expand our market. But instead, they poured their money into stores, brick and mortar stores, usually attached to other stores, in shopping malls. And as the life drained out of shopping malls, as people moved away from them and stopped going, and they declined, the fortune of the company went with it. And now they're all but defunct. Okay. So it's important to keep pushing within the organization. And by the way, I mean, and I'm gonna bet everybody has, and if you haven't already, you probably will be at some time, been stuck in an organization in which there's just zero growth. And you know, in that instance, you get faced with the choice of, do I hang around in a boat that's basically dead in the water, and you know, hope that somehow, as a revenue source, we don't rot here in the sun and I don't have a job? Or do I start looking for ways to jump overboard and swim to something better? You know, those things are going to happen. I had that happen to me. I was working at a very large Christian communication company, and boy, this tells you about, you know, my age. This was back in the 90s, late 90s, early 2000s, and this new platform popped up. They were calling it podcasting. It had come out of the use of MP3, MP4 files, and MP3, that is audio files, that people in the music business were attaching and sending through email, and companies like MTV were attaching bits of song and sending to one another, saying, hey, you know, or record companies saying, hey, maybe we should look at this artist. And there were people in that industry that said, yeah, that's weird. if you could attach an audio file to an email, and then when you click it, it opens, couldn't you just put that link onto a website? Same thing. I mean, if it gets sent or it gets posted, and then you can talk to people. And they started doing this. And people within the Christian community immediately caught on. There was an early organization in the early 2000s that popped up called Disciples with Microphones. I think they're long gone now. And it was their vision to use podcasting to evangelize. And I heard about this, and I was working at this media company, and I was part, of creating content. I was also part of raising a lot of money. And I went down to a small convention they were having down in Florida, and I sat and listened to these guys, and it was just like, whoa, they're blowing my mind. So I came back to the company. My boss, because most of my job was raising money, my boss was the CFO. Nice guy. All right. But not very forward thinking. And I remember after coming back, I said, hey, can we have lunch? I've got something and I want to tell you about. And he's like, sure. Nice guy. I can remember he was from Kentucky. He had a very distinct accent. And we sat down. I sat across from him at the table. We were at some sandwich shop near the office. And I started telling him about what I'd seen at this convention. And I said, this is the future of communication. Now, this particular Christian media organization was heavily invested in radio. And I remember telling him about it, and I could just, the expression on his face, he was just like, and when he was chewing this big sandwich, and I was telling him about this, and he just, when he heard that I was finished with my pitch, he waved, and he goes, what is this? What is this thing here called like a podcast? This is a fad. This is a passing fad. I'm sick and tired of hearing about things that are going to come and go. We're in the radio business, and that's where we're going to stay. And I remember looking across the table at him thinking, you're wrong. You are wrong. And within 2 or 3 years, the organization was in deep financial trouble as people were accessing content more. I mean, it was just like the line went straight up as a rocket through podcasts. I eventually left. Now I still work with that organization. I have a great relationship with them. I don't know what happened to him, because as the company violently contracted from the loss of revenue, he lost his job. So wherever he went, I don't know. But sometimes, you get landed in that spot, and you have to make the decision to hang around or jump ship. Question number 3. I'm sorry, question number 4. That was question number 3. Okay. Question number 4. In chapter 4 of Macroeconomics, Scott and Williams introduced the concept of prosumption. All right, this is one of those things that, just by way of definition, you just go, if I say, if I say prosumption, you go, oh, okay, I know what that is. So wink if you're asked about it. Okay, Austin, one element of graduate schoolwork I enjoy most, strangely enough, is that not every term is boldened in the chapter, leading the reader to go through with intense scavenger hunt to define it. After reading Tapscott and Williams' work on local motors organization and their prosumptive work, I could grasp the terminology, but still wanted to consult outside source to confirm its meaning. Okay. Tapscott and Williams mentioned one primary example of how prosumption can lead to organizational innovation. Most notably, J. Rogers Local Motor creates car designs custom made based on what local community members ask for. Okay, that is correct, Austin. Now, everybody remember to be as direct to the answer as you can. Like Kamisha, Kai, prosumption is described by Tapscott and Williams, refers to a situation where people take part both in creating and using a product rather than remaining passive consumers. Exactly correct. And prosumption now goes on in a lot of venues. Prosumption goes on in media. Prosumption goes on in the writing of books and making of movies. Prosumption goes on in the design of products, software. There's a whole slate of software called open source. And did you know that ChatGPT started out as an open source project? That is, people could take the software, download it, make adjustments to it as they use it. Well, it'd work better if we did like this. Not anymore. Now it's very much about the money. But nevertheless, one of the unique opportunities that this medium, this platform that is the World Wide Web, has given to us is you can tap into a talent pool that scales really well. Okay. And what do I mean by that? What do we mean when we say that the talent pool that scales? That, not like fishy scales, but like blows up. Because, let's say you have 1 million people looking at something and you ask for their input. Okay. What's the best way to make this work, or how could this work better? You might get 900,000 knucklehead responses. You might get 900,000, 900 and a half knucklehead responses. But you might get 100,000 or 50,000 really good ones, or even 10,000, and 10,000 really good bits of information, adjustments, improvements. It's hard to come by within an organization because you're not employing that many people. Okay. So that's the value of prosumption. One of the requirements, though, for it to work well is that you have some means by which to sort the data. That is, when it comes in, to sift through what's, useful and what is either not useful or actually detrimental to the process. Okay, but that's what prosumption is. And that's a term you might hear tossed around and you should be familiar with. A wink. Okay, everybody, that's it. Our 30 minutes are up. So remember, 16th, papers are due. Bringing them on in. Complete work, not draft. All right. Keep on keeping on with the questions. Week 4 now being closed, I will be grading the discussion sections. I grade them in like blocks of 4 weeks. So if you haven't got your stuff in by the time I grade it, it is closed. Okay. So, do I allow the stuff to come in as I'm grading? Well, I tell you what, if you happen to squeak under the wire, if there's answers you haven't answered or responses you haven't responded to by, like week 2, 3, and I haven't gotten to it yet, yeah, okay, fine. I will accept that work. But once it is in the can, it's done. Okay. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for your hard work. I think about you. I pray about you. And I look forward to seeing part 1 of your papers. All right. And I will see you on Canvas. Take care. Have a wonderful rest of the week. God bless. Bye-bye.